Nobody at St. Andrew's Medical Center knew her real name. They called her Nurse Alvarez. Quiet, punctual, forgettable if you weren't paying attention. She kept her eyes down in the hallways and her sleeves rolled to her wrists, even in July. Nobody knew that 6 years ago she had carried a wounded soldier 11 miles through frozen mud and never once stopped moving. Nobody knew what her hands had done before they learned to hold a clipboard. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like every other, 5 men were wheeled through the emergency doors, and one of them said a word that only she was supposed to recognize. Everything after that word was different. Before we get into it, welcome to Silent Heroes, where the quietest people in the room are usually the ones who saved it. If you're watching this from a country that starts with the letter B, drop it in the comments right now. And hit subscribe, because you don't want to miss where this one goes. Now back to the story. St. Andrew's sat on the edge of a mid-sized American city, the kind of hospital that saw car wrecks and heart attacks and, occasionally, something it wasn't built for. Nurse Alvarez had worked there for 2 years. She wore her dark hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no polish on her nails. She had a thin white scar along her left forearm that she always kept covered, and if anyone asked about it, she said, "kitchen accident," and changed the subject before they could ask a second question. She had learned the fastest way to survive was to make herself small. Small enough that Dr. Whitfield, the chief surgeon, barely looked at her twice, except to correct her in front of other people. He liked an audience. He liked the sound of his own voice bouncing off tile. "Alvarez, that's not how we do things here," he'd say, loud enough for the nurse's station to hear, even when she'd done nothing wrong. He was ambitious in the specific way that made him cruel to anyone beneath him and syrupy sweet to anyone above him. 12 years at St. Andrew's, and not once had he been questioned. Not once had anyone dared. There was one person who saw through her. Mr. Halloran, an old widower in room 214 recovering from hip surgery, watched her change his foreline with hands that never once shook. "Even at 3 a.m., you've done this before," he said one night. "Not a question. Somewhere worse than here." She only smiled and told him to get some sleep. But she remembered that he'd said it. Then the doors burst open. 5 men, all in torn tactical gear, blood soaking through improvised bandages, carried in on gurneys that moved too fast for the hallway. Sirens still echoing outside. "A training accident at the nearby reserve base," someone shouted. "2 critical. 3 stable, but fading." Dr. Whitfield took charge immediately, the way he always did, loud and certain and wrong. He called for a chest tube on the man with the collapsed lung, but he was reading the vitals upside down, missing the tension pneumothorax building by the second, the trachea shifting, the jugular vein bulging with pressure that had nowhere to go. Nurse Alvarez saw it in 4 seconds. Deviated trachea. Absent breath sounds on the left. Falling blood pressure. Rising heart rate. Classic tension pneumothorax, and if it wasn't decompressed in the next 2 minutes, the heart itself would stop from the pressure alone. "Doctor, he needs a needle decompression, second intercostal space, midclavicular line, now." Whitfield didn't even turn around. "I did not ask for your opinion, Alvarez." But then the wounded man on the gurney, barely conscious, gripped her sleeve and rasped out a single word. Not English. Not a word from this hospital at all. A call sign. Her old call sign, one she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 6 years. The word hit the room like a detonation. She froze. Every nurse near the bay turned. Whitfield's head snapped up. "What did he just say to you?" Silence. "Alvarez, what did he say?" She didn't answer. She was already moving, already reaching for a 14-gauge needle off the crash cart, her hands no longer trembling the way they had 2 years of pretending had trained them to. Her spine straightened. Her voice, when it came, was flat and certain in a way none of them had ever heard from her. "He's decompensating. If we don't relieve that pressure right now, he arrests." Whitfield stepped in front of her. "Stand down. That is not your call to make. It's not a call. It's a fact. Her tone had changed completely, no hesitation left in it at all. You're reading the monitor wrong. Trachea's shifted right. He has minutes, not an hour. The room held its breath. She stepped past him. She pressed the needle into the second intercostal space, just above the third rib mid-clavicular line, exactly where the textbooks say to go when a lung has collapsed and pressure is crushing the heart from the outside in. A rush of trapped air hissed out. The chest that had been rigid and swollen fell flat again. Oxygen levels climbed on the monitor, 82, 88, 94. The soldier gasped, a real breath, the first in minute. Chest tube kit now, she said, and a junior nurse who had never once heard her raise her voice ran to get it without hesitation. Whitfield stood frozen, the color gone from his face, watching a woman he had humiliated for 2 years save a life he had almost let slip away through his own certainty. The other nurses saw it too. Nobody said a word, but something in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. By 6 o'clock that evening, Whitfield had his revenge ready. He suspended her on the spot, pending investigation, insubordination, he called it, unauthorized medical action outside her scope. Security stood at the nurse's station like she was dangerous. She looked at him and did not flinch. No. I am not leaving until every one of these men is stable. A crowd had gathered by then, nurses, orderlies, even Mr. Halloran shuffling out from 214 on his cane to watch. Whispers moved through the hallway faster than any announcement could. The chief surgeon looked less like a man in control and more like a man who had just made a very public mistake. 3 weeks later, the answer arrived in a black government sedan. 2 officers in dress uniform walked through the front doors of St. Andrew's and asked for her by a name none of the staff had ever heard. Captain Elena Alvarez Reyes. Combat medic, Joint Special Operations, 3 tours, a Silver Star, and a service record that included a rescue mission 11 miles through frozen terrain that had saved 4 men who would have died without her. We read about the incident here, the senior officer said, loud enough for Whitfield to hear every word. Captain Reyes' actions saved a life your hospital nearly lost. We would like to know why she was suspended for it. Whitfield's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. I did not know her background. I was following protocol. You were following your ego, the officer said. That is not protocol. That is negligence. He was stripped of his authority to oversee trauma cases within the hour, pending a full review. His last words, hissed at her in an empty corridor, gave away more than he meant to. You think this changes anything? I built this department. I earned this. But the review uncovered something Whitfield never expected anyone to find. A falsified equipment log, months of it, corners cut on supply orders so he could pocket the difference through a private vendor contract, funded in part by a clinical trial he had quietly steered toward his own financial benefit. It was never about medicine. It was never even about pride. It was about money, and he had let people bleed to protect it. When he realized the review had found the ledgers, he grabbed a scalpel off a supply cart and lunged at the officer holding the file, screaming that she would not take everything from him. Captain Reyes moved before anyone else could. She caught his wrist, twisted it down and away with the same precision she had once used to disarm men twice his size, and pinned him to the floor with a knee between his shoulder blades until security arrived. That night, back in a quiet corner of the ICU, the pneumothorax patient from 3 weeks earlier opened his eyes and asked for her by her call sign again. Wraith. Thought that was you. It was me, she said. It still is. He gripped her hand. Marquez didn't make it out of Kandahar. I know you carry that. I just wanted you to know somebody remembers what you did for the rest of us. Her eyes stung, just for a moment, before she steadied herself the way she always had. Heart rate 88. Blood pressure 118/76. Oxygen 97%. He has a chance, she said quietly, and that was enough. Whitfield was arrested on charges of fraud and attempted assault, and the hospital board revoked his license within the month. St. Andrews opened a new trauma response unit 6 weeks later, named in her honor, the Reyes Rapid Response Program, built specifically for veterans transitioning into civilian medicine. She was asked to run it. Mr. Halloran was there on opening day, sitting near the front in his wheelchair, grinning. "Told you," he said. "I knew there was more to you than a kitchen scar." She smiled, for real this time. There always is, with people. You just have to give them a reason to stop hiding. That is the truth of it. The quietest person in the room is sometimes the strongest one in it. Hiding who you are does not make you safe, it only postpones the moment the truth finally speaks for itself. And when it does, it is usually louder than anything you tried to bury. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe to Silent Heroes for more. Tell us in the comments, do you think Whitfield ever really believed he'd get away with it? Because the next story is already waiting.